If you've ever had that one neighbor or HOA member who thinks the rules don't apply to them, then stick around because this story is going to blow your mind. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss crazy real-life revenge stories just like this one. My name's Daniel, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood that, like most, is plagued by HOA, and while I usually keep to myself and try not to stir up trouble, there was one HOA member, Karen, of course, who made it her life mission to test my patience, push my buttons, and prove to the entire street that she was somehow above the rules she pretended to enforce. And the whole thing started with something as small as her constant obsession with rushing through my gate at full speed, slamming it open with her SUV like she owned my driveway, claiming that the HOA gave her authority to inspect properties without notice, which was complete nonsense because my property was fenced and gated for a reason. Yet this woman would fly through as if it were a public park, knocking into the metal gate so hard that one of the hinges bent, and when I confronted her politely at first, she waved me off with her manicured hand and said, "HOA rules allow me to do surprise checks, so get used to it," which I knew was a blatant lie, but she had that smug tone of voice that made you want to scream, so I decided to gather evidence before making my move, because people like her thrive on gossip and intimidation, but crumble when faced with cold, undeniable facts, and sure enough, within a week she had repeated her little stunt 4 more times, once nearly hitting my dog when he ran across the yard. And when I yelled at her to slow down, she had the audacity to claim that if I didn't want the dog hit I should keep him chained. And that's when I knew this war had officially begun, because I wasn't going to let someone treat my home like her personal racetrack while hiding behind the HOA badge of fake authority. So I installed cameras, not just 1 but 4, covering every angle of my gate, driveway, and street, and waited. And within days I had crisp HD footage of her barreling through at least 35 miles per hour where the limit in our neighborhood was 15, slamming my gate open, sometimes with her car's bumper actually nudging it so hard the whole frame shook. And once I had that evidence I thought maybe the HOA board would do the right thing. But when I presented the video at the monthly meeting, Karen smirked and called it doctored footage, accusing me of trying to embarrass her. And unbelievably the rest of the board, who were mostly her friends, nodded along as if I was the problem. So instead of siding with me, they sent me a warning letter claiming my gate was not HOA compliant, and posed a danger to vehicles that needed to enter, which was insane because it was my private gate on my private property, but it was the push I needed to escalate this beyond HOA nonsense. So I went legal, hiring a lawyer friend of mine to draft a cease and desist letter, but I didn't deliver it right away, because I had something much better in mind. Something that would make Karen regret every single time she flew through my gate. So I upgraded my gate, quietly and carefully, replacing the old bent hinges with reinforced ones and adding a heavy-duty automatic lock system that snapped shut the moment the gate closed. And to top it off, I lined the inside of the gate with a steel reinforcement bar hidden in the wood, so it looked the same as always but was now about 10 times stronger, meaning that if anyone tried to slam into it, they'd be in for a nasty surprise. And sure enough, only a few days later, Karen came screeching down the street in her oversized SUV like she was racing in the Indy 500, and without slowing she plowed into the gate expecting it to swing open like usual, but instead there was a sickening crunch followed by the loud pop of her bumper snapping partly off, and the look on her face, caught perfectly on camera, was priceless. Wide-eyed shock, mouth hanging open, clutching the steering wheel like she couldn't believe reality had just slapped her in the face. And of course she immediately stormed out of the car, screaming at the top of her lungs that I had sabotaged her, that I would pay for damages, and that she was calling the police, which she actually did. And when the cops arrived, she tried to spin her story about how she had the right to enter my property and I had installed a dangerous trap, but the officers weren't buying it, especially when I calmly handed them the footage from my cameras showing her reckless driving, her repeated abuse of the gate, and the fact that she had no legal authority whatsoever to be on my property without my consent. And the best part was when the officer turned to her and said, "Ma'am, what you've done here could be considered trespassing and reckless endangerment," and she sputtered and backpedaled, trying to claim HOA privilege, but the cop shut her down, telling her the HOA didn't overrule private property laws, and by the end of the day she had been slapped with a citation for reckless driving and property damage. And her SUV had to be towed because the bumper had half detached and was dragging, and you'd think that would have taught her a lesson, but Karen was the kind of woman who doubled down when humiliated, so the very next week she filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, demanding that I remove my gate entirely because it was dangerous, and when they backed her up with another bogus warning letter, I decided to unleash phase 2 of my plan, because I knew something they didn't. The HOA had been operating under expired registration paperwork, which my lawyer friend discovered when digging around for leverage, meaning technically they had no legal authority to enforce fines or rules until they renewed their status with the state. And with that little golden ticket in hand, I drafted a neighborhood-wide letter, complete with copies of the expired documents, explaining to every homeowner that the HOA had been operating illegally and that any fines or threats they had issued in the past 6 months were unenforceable, and the neighborhood erupted, with people furious that they had paid fines or endured harassment for no reason. And guess who took the brunt of the backlash? That's right, Karen, because she was the face of the HOA and the loudest enforcer, so overnight she went from smug queen bee to public enemy number 1. With angry neighbors confronting her at her door, demanding refunds, demanding resignations, and one particularly bold neighbor egged her car in broad daylight, something I would never do myself but secretly enjoyed watching. And while she tried to fight back by sending out desperate HOA emails, nobody was listening anymore, and at the next meeting the few remaining board members were shouted down and forced to step down, effectively dissolving the HOA altogether. And without that shield of authority, Karen was just another bitter neighbor with a busted SUV and a reputation in shambles. But I wasn't done yet, because for months she had made my life hell, and I wanted her to feel a little of that pressure, so I filed a small claims lawsuit for the repeated damages to my gate, presenting all the video evidence and the police report, and because she had no defense other than, I thought I had the right, the judge ruled in my favor, ordering her to pay me nearly $5,000 in damages, plus legal fees, and watching her face turn beet red in that courtroom as the judgment was read was sweeter than any victory I'd tasted in years. And she tried to delay payment, of course, but with a lien threat hanging over her, she finally cut the check, and that's when I knew it was over, because from that day forward, she never dared to drive anywhere near my property again. In fact, she sold her house within 6 months, probably too humiliated to face the neighborhood that now saw her as a laughingstock and the cherry on top. The new family that moved into her house were some of the nicest people I've ever met, bringing over cookies when they introduced themselves and actually apologizing for the drama the previous owner had caused. And every time I look at my gate, strong and unbroken, I can't help but smile at the memory of Karen's face when her SUV bounced off it like a rubber ball hitting a brick wall. And I think to myself, sometimes karma needs a little push, and sometimes that push is reinforced steel, patience, and a carefully executed plan of revenge.